can't remember. What's she like?
Oh, she's everything you could ever want in a girl. Pretty? Yes. Funny? Yes. Smart? No.
Ever get the feeling that TV networks sometimes see a hit show not as a great story, but as a goose that lays golden eggs? They get one hit, and suddenly they want a dozen more, no matter how much they have to stretch the story. Wait till you hear how they tried to make a star out of a character from Married with Children. 1. The Ropers.
I'm afraid we dropped the vase.
Oh, Stanley, they broke the vase your mother gave us. Here's another $5.
Let's start with a textbook example of how to break a perfect machine. Three's Company was one of the biggest hits of the late 70s, a bubbly comedy about three single roommates, Jack, Janet, and Chrissy, and their wacky misunderstandings. A huge part of that show's magic was their landlords, the Ropers. Stanley was cheap and grumpy, and Helen was constantly frustrated by their lack of a romantic life. Their back-and-forth bickering was the perfect spice, a hilarious counterpoint to the youthful energy upstairs. They were brilliant, in small doses. So, what did the network do? They decided to take that one spice and try to make a whole meal out of it. The Ropers ripped Stanley and Helen out of their apartment building and moved them into a fancy, upscale neighborhood after they sold their old place. The entire premise was their working-class attitude clashing with their snooty new neighbors, led by the pompous Jeffrey P. Brooks III. Here's the kicker. Without Jack, Janet, and Chrissy to react to, the Ropers weren't funny foils anymore. They were just a miserable, bickering couple. The one joke they had, Helen's frustration and Stanley's cheapness, got old incredibly fast. Truth be told, the show was a ratings disaster that was canceled after just 2 seasons. But the real damage was done to Three's Company. The show lost a core part of its dynamic and never fully recovered, even with the great Don Knotts as the new landlord, Mr. Furley. It was a move that weakened a hit show to create a flop, a truly baffling decision that still makes fans scratch their heads. But if you think ripping 2 supporting characters from their home was a bad move, wait until you see what happened when they tried to build a show around 2 of the biggest teen idols of the era. 2. Joni Loves Chachi.
I say we're adults. I say we can make our own decisions. I say we leave through the bathroom window.
I'm glad we're adults, Chuck.
Happy Days was a wholesome juggernaut. For years, it was America's favorite nostalgic look at the 1950s, centered on the Cunningham family and their cool, leather-jacketed friend, Fonzie. As the show went on, Richie Cunningham's little sister, Joni Erin Moran, started a romance with Fonzie's younger cousin, Charles Chachi Arcola Scott Baio. They became instant teen idols, their faces plastered on every teen magazine. To the network, it seemed like a can't-miss idea. Give the 2 young lovebirds their own show. And so, Joni Loves Chachi was born. The spin-off followed the couple as they moved to Chicago to pursue their dreams of becoming rock stars, forming a band with Chachi's family members. The show was meant to be a vehicle for their musical talents and their on-screen romance. There was just one massive problem. The show was incredibly boring. The plots were thin, the music was forgettable, 80s schmaltz pretending to be 60s rock, and the central charm of Happy Days, the family dynamic and the friendship with Fonzie, was completely gone. Audiences who loved Joni and Chachi as part of the Happy Days ensemble just weren't interested in watching them on their own. The show felt less like a heartfelt story and more like a cynical marketing ploy to sell records. After a moderately successful first season, the ratings went into a freefall. The show was quickly put out of its misery after just 17 episodes. In a truly embarrassing move, Joni and Chachi were sent right back to Milwaukee to finish out the final season of Happy Days. Their dreams of stardom in Chicago swept under the rug as if they never happened. Moving 2 characters to a new city was a risk that backfired spectacularly, but it was nothing compared to the gamble NBC took when it tried to spin off arguably the most beloved sitcom character of the 21st century. 3. Joey.
I can't remember. What's she like? Oh, she's everything you could ever want in a girl. Pretty? Yes. Funny? Yes. Smart? No.
After 10 years, 6 main characters, and a jillion we were on a break jokes, Friends ended its run as one of the most successful sitcoms of all time. The finale was a massive cultural event, but NBC wasn't ready to let go of its cash cow. So they made a decision that, in hindsight, seems almost arrogant. They decided to take one friend, Joey Tribbiani, Matt LeBlanc, the lovable, dim-witted actor, and build a whole new show around him. The idea was to follow Joey as he moved from New York to Hollywood to finally get serious about his acting career. On paper, maybe it sounded plausible, but the creators of Joey made a fatal error. They misunderstood what made the character work. Joey was the perfect comic relief in an ensemble. His loyalty, his goofy one-liners, and his simple worldview were hilarious when bounced off of his 5 smarter, more cynical friends. He was the heart, but Chandler was the wit. Ross was the neurosis. Monica was the drive. Rachel was the heartthrob, and Phoebe was the weirdness. When you take Joey and put him on an island, all you have is a guy who isn't very bright. The how you doin' charm wore thin without his friends to ground him. The new supporting cast, including his high-strung sister Gina and his genius nephew Michael, just couldn't replicate the once-in-a-generation chemistry of the original. The show felt like a hollow, sad echo of Friends. Despite a huge promotional push, the ratings steadily dropped. The show was pulled from the air midway through its 2nd season, with 8 episodes left unaired in the U.S. It stands as perhaps the most high-profile and expensive sitcom spin-off failure in modern history, a lesson that sometimes you just can't go home again, especially when your home was a multi-million-dollar set with 5 other people. Joey proved that even the most popular character can't survive without their original ecosystem. But our next entry shows what happens when you try to continue one of the most acclaimed shows ever, long after its story was finished. 4. After MASH.
Sorry, I was removing mistletoe from the confessional. Some young couple must have had fun last night.
I'll never do it again, Father.
The series finale of MASH, Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, is the stuff of television legend. More than 125 million people tuned in to say goodbye to the 4077th Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. It was a poignant, perfect ending to a show that had brilliantly blended comedy and drama for 11 seasons. The Korean War was over, and everyone went home. The story was done. Or so we thought. Just 6 months later, CBS, desperate to keep the MASH magic alive, launched After MASH. The show picked up right after the war, following 3 of the original characters, Colonel Potter, Harry Morgan, Maxwell Klinger, Jamie Farr, and Father Mulcahy, William Christopher. The setting was a dreary Veterans Administration hospital in Missouri, where Potter was the chief of staff, Klinger was his administrative assistant, and Mulcahy was the chaplain. Get this. The show tried to replicate the laughing through the tears formula of the original, but the stakes were completely different. Instead of the life or death pressure of a war zone, the conflicts were about hospital bureaucracy and the characters' mundane post-war lives. It felt depressing. The witty, fast-paced dialogue of the original was replaced with a slower, more somber tone. Hawkeye, BJ, and the rest of the iconic cast were gone, and their absence left a massive hole that could never be filled. Critics savaged the show, and audiences, who had already said their emotional goodbyes, felt cheated. While it actually had a decent first season in the ratings, it plummeted in its 2nd year and was canceled. Time magazine later named it one of the worst ideas in television history. It was an embarrassing attempt to squeeze a few more dollars out of a masterpiece, and it remains a cautionary tale about knowing when to let a good thing end. Tarnishing a beloved classic is one thing, but our next spin-off didn't just tarnish a classic, it took one of its most abrasive characters and tried to make her the star. Believe me, it went about as well as you'd expect. 5. The Tortellis.
That's fair, as long as we sleep together and I get some change. Can you take a joke?
Not when it's married to my sister.
Cheers is a masterclass in sitcom writing and character development. Every single person who bellied up to that bar was a perfectly crafted, hilarious archetype. And then there was Carla Tortelli's ex-husband, Nick Tortelli Dan Hedaya, and his new wife, Loretta Jean Kasem. Nick was a sleazy, deadbeat slimeball, and Loretta was a bubbly, dim-witted blonde. They were hilarious in their brief appearances on Cheers, usually showing up to make Carla's life miserable. They were perfect side characters, designed to be annoying in small, funny doses. For reasons that defy all human logic, someone at NBC decided that these two obnoxious characters needed their own show. The Tortellis followed Nick and Loretta as they moved from Boston to Las Vegas, so Loretta could pursue her dream of becoming a pop star. Nick, meanwhile, had to manage her career while also raising his teenage son from a previous relationship. The show also moved in Loretta's naive, ditzy sister. The entire household was a chaotic mess of loud, abrasive, and frankly, unlikable people. The problem was glaringly obvious. Why would anyone want to spend half an hour every week with these characters? On Cheers, their sliminess was a funny contrast to the warmth of the bar. On their own, they were just grating. The show was loud, obnoxious, and completely lacking in the clever wit and heart that made Cheers a hit. It was a critical and commercial bomb of epic proportions. The Tortellis was yanked from the air after just 13 episodes. In a final humiliating nail in the coffin, the show's finale saw Loretta leave Nick, and he moved back to Boston, right back into the world of Cheers, where he continued to pop up occasionally as if his Vegas adventure had just been a bad dream. Giving the Tortellis their own show was a wild swing and a miss. But it wasn't the first time a network spun off a major character from a groundbreaking sitcom into a much less successful vehicle. Next up, we look at what happened when Archie Bunker's little girl tried to make it on her own. 6. Gloria.
You know what your cigar smoke is doing to my hair? It gets in there, and then Michael says he can't stand the smell of it.
What's his nose doing in your hair?
All in the Family changed television forever. It was a cultural earthquake, tackling hot-button issues with fearless comedy. At the heart of the show was the clash between the bigoted Archie Bunker and his liberal daughter, Gloria Stivic Sally Struthers, and her husband, Mike Meathead Stivic. For years, their arguments were the engine of the show. Eventually, Gloria and Mike moved to California, leaving the series. But the network wasn't done with Gloria. A few years later, in the spin-off Gloria, we learned that Mike has left her for another woman and joined a commune. So, Gloria packs up her son, Joey, and moves back east, but not to her dad's place. Instead, she lands a job as an assistant to a veterinarian in upstate New York. The show was meant to be about a newly single mother trying to build a new life for herself and her son. On the surface, it's a decent premise for a sitcom. But there was a fundamental flaw. The character of Gloria was defined by her relationships as Archie's daughter, Edith's protector, and Meathead's wife. Her fiery passion and her liberal ideals were powerful because they were in direct opposition to her father. When you take her away from that context, what's left? The show struggled to find its comedic footing. It was sweet and well-intentioned, but it lacked the sharp confrontational edge that made Gloria an interesting character in the first place. Without Archie to fight with, she just wasn't as compelling. The show was produced by Norman Lear's company and had a solid cast, but it never found an audience. It was canceled after a single 21-episode season, proving that even a beloved character from a legendary show can get lost when they're separated from the family that made them famous. Gloria's solo journey was a quiet disappointment, but our next entry was a loud, crude, and glorious failure that tried to capture the trashy magic of its parent show. 7. Top of the heap.
You don't really think he'd sell my cat, do you?
Well, for $300, my dad tried to convince my mom to be the Volvo test dummy.
Married with Children was the anti-family sitcom. It was crude, it was cynical, and it was hilarious. It thumbed its nose at the wholesome family comedies of the 80s, and audiences loved it. One of the show's recurring characters was Vinny Verducci, played by a young Matt LeBlanc, years before Friends, a dim-witted wannabe tough guy and friend of Kelly Bundy. He was a perfect fit for the show's sleazy, low-rent world. In 1991, Fox decided to see if Vinny could carry his own series. The spin-off, Top of the Heap, was introduced as a backdoor pilot in an episode of Married with Children. The show centered on Vinny and his scheming con artist father, Charlie Joseph Bologna, who were living in a rundown apartment. Their one goal in life was to get rich by having Vinny marry a wealthy socialite. Each week, Charlie would cook up some ridiculous scheme to get Vinny into high society events so he could woo a rich woman, with their blue-collar sensibilities constantly clashing with the upper crust. It sounds like a workable, if silly, premise. The problem was that it was basically a one-joke show. Vinny was a less charming version of Al Bundy, and the show lacked the twisted family dynamic that made Married so unique. It was all the crudeness with none of the cleverness. The show felt like a pale imitation, a cheap knockoff of the very show it spun off from. Despite being given a prime slot after Married with Children, audiences rejected it. Top of the Heap was axed after just 7 episodes. It was a quick and embarrassing flop that proved you can't just copy and paste a formula and expect the same results. But believe it or not, the story of Vinny Verducci doesn't end there. The failure of Top of the Heap led to one of the rarest things in television, a spin-off of a failed spin-off. And it was even worse. 8. Vinny and Bobby.
Hey, Mona, will you go away? Can't you see that we're in California?
Why is it every time you open your mouth, I expect to see you standing next to an organ grinder?
You have to admire the sheer persistence of the Fox network in the early 90s. They tried to make Vinny Verducci happen. They really, really did. After Top of the Heap, the spin-off of Married with Children crashed and burned after 7 episodes. Any normal network would have cut its losses and moved on. But not Fox. In a truly mind-boggling move, they decided to retool the failed show and try again. They got rid of Vinny's dad, the central character of the original spin-off, and replaced him with a new roommate, Bobby Grazzo, Robert Torti. Vinny and Bobby followed the 2 working-class guys as they navigated life, work, and their constant, usually unsuccessful, attempts to meet women. The premise shifted from a get-rich-quick scheme to a more standard 2 dumb guys hanging out sitcom. They essentially took a failed spin-off, stripped it of its original premise, and turned it into a completely generic buddy comedy. If Top of the Heap was a pale imitation of Married with Children, Vinny and Bobby was a bland, lifeless sitcom with no identity whatsoever. Matt LeBlanc and Robert Torti had decent chemistry, but the writing was lazy and the jokes were tired. It had none of the edge of its parent show and none of the admittedly weird charm of its predecessor. It was the television equivalent of a photocopy of a photocopy, faded, blurry, and pointless. Unsurprisingly, audiences were even less interested this time around. The show was canceled after, you guessed it, just 7 episodes. The saga of Vinny Verducci finally came to an end, a 2-time loser in the spin-off game, and a legendary example of a network that simply refused to take a hint. Giving a spin-off a second chance is rare, but our next show is even rarer, a spin-off of a spin-off of a spin-off. Get ready for a deep dive into sitcom inception. 9. Checking in.
You know, Florence, in the 2 weeks that you've been here, you've made my life so much easier.
Really?
Yeah, you know, Mr. Block spends so much time yelling at you, he doesn't have time to yell at me anymore.
In the history of 70s and 80s, sitcoms is a tangled web of spin-offs. All in the Family gave us The Jeffersons. The Jeffersons was a massive hit in its own right, famous for its iconic characters, including the sharp-tongued and hilarious maid, Florence Johnston, played by the brilliant Marla Gibbs. Florence's sarcastic comebacks and her lazy attitude were a constant highlight of the show. She was a breakout character, a scene stealer of the highest order. So, of course, the network decided she needed her own series. In 1981, Florence left the Jeffersons' employ to become the executive housekeeper at the fictional St. Frederick Hotel in New York City. The show, Checking In, followed her as she tried to manage the hotel's wacky staff and deal with its eccentric guests. It was a classic workplace comedy setup, a solid enough premise for a talented performer like Marla Gibbs. However, the magic was gone. Florence was funny because of her interactions with George Jefferson. Their constant verbal sparring was the core of her character. Taking her away from that dynamic and making her the responsible boss took away her edge. She was no longer the wisecracking employee sticking it to the man. She was the man, or woman in this case. The show just wasn't very funny, and it felt like something was missing, namely, the Jeffersons. The network seemed to agree. In a stunningly quick move, Checking In was canceled after only 4 episodes. In an almost unheard-of reversal, Florence's character was immediately written back into the Jeffersons, with the explanation that the St. Frederick Hotel had burned down. It was a swift and embarrassing retreat, proving that some characters, no matter how great, belong exactly where they are. Taking a maid out of a luxury apartment was a bust. But what about taking a detective out of his squad room? Next up, a beloved character from a classic cop comedy gets a spin-off that was just plain fishy. 10. Fish.
Where are you going?
Home.
You said you'd give it a chance.
I did. That's as much of a chance as I want to take.
Barney Miller was one of the most acclaimed sitcoms of the 70s. Set almost entirely in the squad room of New York's 12th Precinct, it was a masterclass in character-driven comedy. The detectives were a hilarious bunch of misfits, and none were more beloved than the perpetually tired, cynical, and world-weary Detective Phil Fish, played by Abe Vigoda. Fish was famous for his monotone delivery, his constant complaints about his various ailments, and his frequent trips to the bathroom. He was a comedy legend. Naturally, the network saw dollar signs. They decided to spin Fish off into his own series. The premise of Fish was that he and his wife Bernice had decided to become foster parents to a racially diverse group of 5 troubled kids, referred to as persons in need of supervision, or PINs. So, the grumpy, cynical detective who could barely handle his co-workers was now in charge of a chaotic household of street-smart children. The problem was that the entire concept went against the core of the character. Fish was funny because he was a miserable old guy stuck in a high-stress job. Putting him in a warm family sitcom setting felt completely wrong. The tone was all over the place. Was it a gritty look at the foster care system or a heartwarming family comedy? It tried to be both and succeeded at neither. The sharp, witty dialogue of Barney Miller was replaced by predictable family squabbles and sentimental moments that felt unearned. While Abe Vigoda was as great as ever, the material just wasn't there. The show lasted for 2 seasons, but is remembered as a strange and misguided attempt to turn a hilariously grumpy character into a lovable family man. It was a classic case of taking a fish out of water and watching him flop. Turning a cynic into a dad was a weird move. But what about turning a bumbling deputy into a big city detective? Next, we head down to Georgia for a spin-off that was a real hazard. 11. Enos.
I initiated to broaden the unit's ethnic and social base. Does anybody here know what that means?
It means you're going to mix more spades and beaners with your honkies, sir.
Y'all come back now, you hear? The Dukes of Hazzard was a cartoon come to life. It was all about fast cars, goofy crooks, and good old boys who were never meanin' no harm. One of the show's most endearing characters was Deputy Enos Strait, the honest, blushing, and hopelessly naive lawman who was secretly friends with the Duke boys and had a massive crush on Daisy. He was sweet, innocent, and completely incompetent, often exclaiming "possum on a gumbush" when things went wrong. In a move that still puzzles fans, CBS decided that this gullible, small-town deputy was ready for the big time. They spun him off into his own series, Enos, where he leaves Hazzard County and joins the Los Angeles Police Department. He was paired with a tough, street-smart African-American partner, Turk Adams. The comedy was supposed to come from Enos's fish-out-of-water country boy antics, clashing with the gritty reality of big-city police work. The show was a tonal disaster. It tried to merge the slapstick, cartoonish world of Dukes with a more realistic, serious police procedural. 1 minute, Enos would be chasing bad guys in a high-stakes situation, and the next, he'd be doing his trademark goofy grin and spouting his down-home catchphrases. It just didn't work. The character's sweet naivete, which was charming in Hazzard County, just made him look like a clueless idiot in L.A. The show was a ratings failure and was canceled after 1 season. Just like Joni and Chachi, a defeated Enos was sent packing back to Hazzard County for the remainder of the original series run, his big city detective career conveniently forgotten. It was another failed experiment in thinking a lovable sidekick could carry the weight of a whole show. Sending a character to a new city is a common spin-off trope that rarely works. But what happens when you keep the city, keep most of the cast, but remove one irreplaceable core member? Our next entry is a golden example. 12. The Golden Palace.
A very important group is checking in. The daughters of the traditional South. And I want dinner to be perfect.
What do you want me to do? Cook a possum or something?
The Golden Girls was lightning in a bottle. 4 older women, Dorothy, Rose, Blanche, and Sophia, living together in Miami, sharing laughs, heartaches, and a whole lot of cheesecake. The chemistry between B. Arthur, Betty White, Rue McClanahan, and Estelle Getty was pure magic. It was one of the most beloved and critically acclaimed sitcoms ever. But after 7 seasons, B. Arthur decided it was time to leave. The smart move would have been to end the show. But this is Hollywood we're talking about. Instead, CBS decided to press on with a spin-off called The Golden Palace. The story goes that after Dorothy gets married and moves away, the remaining 3 girls, Rose, Blanche, and Sophia, decide to sell their beloved house and invest in a new business, a hotel in Miami. The show followed their chaotic attempts to run the hotel with help from a wisecracking chef played by Don Cheadle and a precocious foster child. The fatal flaw was obvious from the first minute. Dorothy Zbornak was gone. B. Arthur's character was the anchor of the group. Her sarcastic, deadpan delivery was the perfect counterbalance to Rose's naivete, Blanche's vanity, and Sophia's outrageous stories. Without her, the whole dynamic felt off balance. The show just wasn't as sharp or as funny. It felt like a band trying to play on after losing its lead singer. Despite the immense talent of the remaining cast, The Golden Palace never captured the magic of the original. It was canceled after a single season, a sad and unnecessary epilogue to a nearly perfect series. It proved that sometimes a group is more than the sum of its parts, and when you remove a key part, the whole thing can collapse. Losing one girl was a disaster. But what if you took 2 other girls from a completely different show and tried to build a series around them? Next up, a spin-off that tried to say, "I do," but got a swift, "I don't." 13. The Brady Brides.
We won't look at them. We promise. We don't even like tropical fish.
I don't know if I could live with anyone that doesn't like tropical fish.
For a show that only ran for 5 seasons in the early 70s, the Brady Bunch has had a bizarrely long and often embarrassing afterlife. The wholesome story of a lovely lady and a man named Brady has been revived, rebooted, and spun off more times than almost any other show in history. One of the most awkward attempts was The Brady Brides. The spin-off was launched with a TV movie called The Brady Girls Get Married, in which the 2 eldest Brady daughters, Marcia and Jan, have a double wedding, marrying 2 quirky new characters. The series The Brady Brides picked up right after the weddings. The 2 couples, Marcia and Wally and Jan and Philip, find they can't afford their own places, so they decide to pool their money and buy a house together. The entire show was about the 4 of them living under one roof, with the predictable conflicts that arise from their clashing personalities. Jan is still insecure, Marcia is still Marcia, and their new husbands were a goofy toy salesman and a stuffy college professor. The show felt like a desperate attempt to recapture the Brady magic by forcing a new, smaller bunch together. The problem was, nobody cared. The charm of the original was the chaotic but loving dynamic of the huge family with 6 kids. A show about just 2 of them and their new husbands felt small and uninteresting. The humor was forced, and the plots were flimsy. It was a sitcom built on a foundation of pure nostalgia, with no real creative reason to exist. The Brady Brides lasted for a meager 10 episodes before being canceled, becoming just one of many failed attempts to make the world care about the Brady kids as adults.